Okay, so we are now recording our third Zoom session in 120, Anatomy and Physiology of the Ear and Hearing. And today what we're going to cover is the middle ear. And specifically, we're going to be covering the anatomy of the middle ear, not the physiology. That's next week. So this unit, Unit 3, will take 2 weeks. So this week we cover the anatomy, next week the physiology. Last week we covered the anatomy and physiology of the outer ear, and in week 1 we covered the whole overview of the entire ear. So as we work our way in, things start to get more detailed and more complicated because the middle ear is more complicated than the outer ear, and of course the inner ear is more complicated than the middle ear. So in the inner ear we will spend 4 weeks. So things double up each time we go in. Anyway, let's do the middle ear. We are recording, and I'm going to share screen, and we'll take a look at what we've got here. So our middle ear notes, middle ear anatomy and physiology. And here's our middle ear PowerPoint, and we're going to be specifically looking at this guy here. Okay, here's your ear canal, ear drum. We covered that last week. Now we're looking here. Interesting set of structures. Never call them the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup again. They are now the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. Looking at our notes, the pieces of the middle ear consist of the inner skin of the tympanic membrane. Now recall from last time, here's your tympanic membrane, and it has 3 layers to it we covered before, okay? It has the inner layer, the outer layer, and there's a middle layer. Now the eardrum, we said, is very unique in that it's comprised of the 3 original embryonic tissues: ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm. Ectoderm outside, mesoderm the middle, endoderm the inside. Endoderm, we said, was responsible for all the slimy parts of the body: the intestines, your guts, the inside of your cheeks, the inside of your nose, and the lining of the middle ears. So now we'll look at our PowerPoint slide. Our notes, I should say. It also, so the middle ear consists of the inner skin of the tympanic membrane, and we said it's also a closed middle ear space, lined with mucus layer and surrounded by porous mastoid bone. Here's the picture. There's the inner lining of the eardrum. So I'm going to blow that up. So the middle ear consists of the inner, this layer of tissue of the drum, and the lining of the closed middle ear space. This is a mucus lining, meaning it's glistening and wet, and it's surrounded by the porous portion of the temporal bone. The temporal bone, recall, is the side bone of the skull, and we said it has 2 parts, a mastoid portion and a petrous portion. Recall? The petrous portion is the inner portion. It surrounds mainly the inner ear. And petrous, Peter, the rock, Petra is the Greek word for hard. Okay, so the bone that I'm circling here that surrounds all of this is the petrous portion of the temporal bone, and this temporal bone here, this is the mastoid portion of the temporal bone. The mastoid portion is very holy. You've got Peter here and you've got holy here. You'd think I'd be talking religion, but it has full of holes. It's very porous. I'll show you something here just to remind us of. Here's a holy rock, okay? Lots of holes in it, okay? That's like the petrous portion, I should say the mastoid portion. You can see the holes here. So anyway, and when we go back to our notes, the Eustachian tube is also involved with the middle ear. And you'll see the word closed now twice. Once here, and once here. Okay? These things, when you see them on pictures, here's the Eustachian tube. And this goes down to the back of your throat. Where? To about where your tonsils are. Okay? This goes back to the bottom, to the back of your throat. Now, it's drawn as if it is open. But really, the Eustachian tube is completely closed, and it only opens if you blow your nose hard or when you swallow. When you swallow, your Eustachian tubes open for a second and then close. And the reason why they open for a second and then they close is to allow new air to get up into your middle ear space. This is your middle ear space. The bones are surrounded by air, and the air here communicates with the air out here by means of the Eustachian tube. Now, the Eustachian tube, I always say, is a lot like government offices, closed unless forced open. Okay? So the Eustachian tube remains closed. It opens when you yawn, if you swallow, if you blow your nose hard, you can feel your ears pop. Okay? That's your Eustachian tube being forced open for a split second. The middle ear has 3 ossicles, and the ossicles are the bones, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, and the ligaments. Now the ligaments are shown here. Here's a ligament holding your middle ear ossicles in place. There's also another one, but it's not shown here. Okay? And the middle ear space also contains 2 muscles. The stapedius muscle, which is innervated by the 7th facial nerve. Now notice the 7, a V with 1, 1. Okay, that's the Roman numeral 7. Recall in the beginning of the course we said you have 12 pairs of cranial nerves. And what are cranial nerves? Nerves inside the skull. And they come off of the brain stem. What's the brain stem? The brain stem is the spinal cord inside your skull. So the brain stem is about 1 inch long, and it ends at the bottom of your brain. And you have 12 pairs of nerves coming off your brain stem, which is the spinal cord inside your skull. The 12 pairs of nerve, the 8th pair is the hearing nerve, and that connects, excuse me, the brain stem to the inner ears. So you've got the outer ear, the middle ear, the inner ears, and the 8th cranial nerves, one going from the right cochlea to the brain stem, one going from the left cochlea to the brain stem. Okay, good, we got that. Next. And so the stapedius muscle is a tiny little muscle attached to the stapes bone. We'll talk about that later. And the nerve that communicates with it, the nerve that we call that innervate. And what does it mean? The nerve terminates at a muscle. Now, all nerves terminate at muscles or glands. That's what nerves do. Okay? Nerves tell muscles to contract, and nerves tell glands to secrete. Otherwise, these little creatures wouldn't know what to do. Your brain has to tell them something. And how does your brain communicate with the organs? It communicates by way of nerves. Okay? So when I want to bend my fingers, my brain has communicated by nerves to the muscles in my hand to bend my hand. Okay? So the nerves that communicate with the 2 middle ear muscles are called the 5th nerve and the 7th cranial nerve. So in this course, there are 3 cranial nerves involved: the 5th, the 7th, and the 8th. The 8th is a sensory nerve. The 8th sends sound info to the brain. The 5th cranial nerve communicates with the tensor tympani muscle, and the 7th cranial nerve communicates with the stapedius muscle. And these 2 muscles pull on the middle ear bones. So here's a picture, just to give you an idea, okay? This is again, the eardrum, the malleus, incus, stapes, and here's a ligament holding the malleus bone. And look at this. That's the tensor tympani muscle. Okay? And here's the stapes bone. And here is the stapedius muscle. Okay, tendon of the stapedius muscle. So you have the stapedius muscle and the tensor tympani muscle. And these two muscles are innervated by the 7th cranial nerves and the 5th cranial nerve. Good. Here's a schematic of the three things, of all of it. Here's your eardrum, malleus, incus, stapes. Here they're showing a ligament holding this part of the incus in place. Here's the tensor tympani muscle, and here's the stapedius muscle. So the malleus, incus, and stapes held in place by ligaments, and there's two muscles that can pull on those bones. The muscles pulling on those two bones is called the acoustic reflex. And the acoustic reflex happens when? With loud sounds. If loud sounds occur, those two little muscles pull. And the pulling of those muscles makes the middle ear temporarily less efficient at passing sound because the bones are fixed in place. So it makes the middle ear less less able to transmit sound. So it's nature's own protection against loud sounds. Also, when you speak, have you ever listened to yourself on a tape recorder or a recording? Do you like the sound of your own voice? I don't. Okay? I always say my voice sounds like geese farts on a muggy day. It doesn't sound good. Okay? But other people, when they listen to your voice on a recording, they go, no, that sounds just like you. You're the only one who doesn't like it. How come? Because for the first time, you're hearing other people as they hear you. You're hearing other people only through sound waves through the air. When you're hearing a recording of your voice, the recorder's over there, and you are hearing the sound waves coming to your ears. But when you hear your own voice, when you yourself are talking, you hear yourself through the air, but you also hear yourself through the bone. So you hear yourself through the bones of your skull and also through the air. You hear yourself louder than other people hear you. Okay? Because you're hearing yourself through air conduction and bone conduction. And that's loud enough to cause the acoustic reflex. So the acoustic reflex actually dulls the loudness of your own voice while you talk. Weird, huh? But now we're getting into physiology. So let's back out and stick with anatomy this week. So let's do that. Stay with anatomy. We'll talk more about the acoustic reflex next week. Here we go. So the parts of the middle ear, the inner skin of the tympanic membrane, the closed middle ear space, lined with mucus layer and surrounded by porous mastoid bone, the Eustachian tube, which is closed unless forced open, the three middle ear ossicles, the malleus, incus, and stapes, and the two middle ear muscles, the stapedius muscle attached to the stapes, which is innervated by the 7th or the facial cranial nerve, and the tensor tympani muscle, which is attached to the malleus, and it's innervated by the 5th or what we call the trigeminal cranial nerve. Okay. Parts of the middle ear in a little bit more detail. Recall the temporal bone has two parts. The soft mastoid portion that houses the outer ear canal, and the mastoid bone has lots of air pockets here. And it partially surrounds the middle ear as well. So it surrounds the outer ear canal and parts of the middle ear and partially around the middle ear space. And then you have the hard petrous portion that surrounds most of the middle ear space and the cochlea. And now the closed middle ear space is about, in English, about the size of a sugar cube. You don't need to memorize this stuff, just it's about the size of a sugar cube. That's the best way to conceptualize it. Mucous membrane lines the entire space of the middle ear, including the inside of the tympanic membrane and the Eustachian tube. The jugular vein lies just below the floor of your middle ear space. So the jugular vein would be somewhere over here, okay? The jugular, go for the jugular. All right, you have an area here called the epitympanic recess. You see, in anatomy, they not only give things names, but they also give spaces names. The epitympanic recess is the middle ear space just above your eardrum and malleus. So this would be your epitympanic recess right here, epitympanic. Okay, that space just above the eardrum and the malleus. Back to your notes. You have another space here called additus ad antrum. Additus ad antrum is the area just above the incus and the stapes. It's a little bit more medial than the epitympanic recess. What do we mean by that? This is the epitympanic, this would be the epitympanic recess. This is the additus ad antrum. It's a little bit more medial. Medial meaning lying toward the center of the head, not lateral. Lateral is to the side, medial is to the middle. And mastoiditis begins here. Inflammation and infection of the mastoid bone. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about the pathology called otitis media. Oto, ear, itis, inflammation, media, middle ear infection. Middle ear infections are caused by a swollen Eustachian tube. Check this out. Little kids get earaches. Adults don't so much. Infection comes from a sore throat up the Eustachian tube. How come? Because little kids' faces are short. Adult faces are long. But before you hit puberty, your faces are shorter. And your Eustachian tubes are horizontal. And when your Eustachian tubes are horizontal, infection easily comes from your throat into your middle ear space. And now your middle ear space gets infected. And that's called an earache. When you get to be an adult, your face is longer and your Eustachian tubes are more vertical. So you have gravity working in your favor. Infection doesn't come up there as easily. That's why people grow out of earaches. Earaches are more common in children. It's also usually not a great idea for mothers to nurse their children while lying down, because the baby's lying down, and when he or she swallows the milk will easily go up into the baby's middle ear spaces, and that can cause infection. So there's lots of things about this. Otitis media is the biggest pathology of the middle ear. It's the most common pathology of the middle ear. It's curable. I mean, medicine can fix it, but it can really be painful. And if untreated, otitis media can infect, where I'm drawing my cursor here, can infect this space, this area of the mastoid bone. The additus ad antrum space, if this is all filled with pus, that pus in filling up the whole middle ear space can now get into the air pockets of the mastoid bone, and that's called mastoiditis. And if you've got mastoiditis, Houston, you've got a problem. You're going to have surgery, because now antibiotics won't do it anymore. All right, just wanted you to know. All right, share screen here again, but this time not so much the PowerPoint. Let's go back to our notes, and again, some of the pieces in part. Carotid artery sits behind the anterior wall of the middle ear space. Anterior is the front, okay, and it's not in the you can't see it in the slide overhead. You can't see it in the slide. Okay, so just don't worry about it. But the carotid artery and the jugular vein are two big blood vessels that are right near the middle ear. By the way, what's the difference between an artery and a vein? Veins take blood and return it back to the heart. Veins are slow and sluggish, and the blood going through your veins is almost blue, because it doesn't have any oxygen in it. Arteries carry blood from the heart to the parts of your body. Arteries are what's pounding. Boom, boom, boom. So when you put your hand on your wrist and feel your heartbeat, that's an artery. Okay? Arteries are where you can feel the pulse of your heart. And arteries, the blood is crimson red because it's filled with oxygen. So veins return blood back to the heart. Arteries send info or blood from the heart. Just a little piece of anatomy, something good to know. Anywho, share screen. So the jugular vein, carotid artery are two big blood vessels near the middle ear space. You'll see something here called the chorda tympani nerve. That's a branch of the seventh cranial nerve, which is often called the facial nerve, and it passes through the middle ear space. It's not seen on your overheads, or I should say on your slides, okay? But it's a branch of your seventh nerve that can often get in the way of middle ear surgery. And it carries taste information from the front 2/3 of your tongue. The inner wall is something to behold as well. When you're looking at the inner wall of the middle ear space, right here, right where my cursor is, things get really complicated here. Look at this. You have the foot plate of the stapes, and the foot plate of the stapes fits into what is called the oval window. So the foot plate of the stapes is actually the doorway or the entry into the inner ear. The oval window. Think about the foot plate of the stapes, much like my fist. And here's the oval window is a circle, and the fist can push in and out of that circle. That oval window, that's the entrance to the cochlea. So when sound hits the eardrum, it pushes on those middle ear bones, which in turn pushes the foot plate of the stapes in and out of the oval window. That's how sound activates the inner ear. Okay, back to this wall again. This is the inner wall of the middle ear space. Oval window. And then you have this big bump here. This bump is called the promontory. Promontory. When you think of a promontory, well, that's just kind of like a hill. It's a mound. It's a bump. Okay? Promontory. It's bone. And then you'll see something right here that I'm circling. And this is called the round window. Now, when the oval window pushes in, the round window bulges out. You've got a trade-off of information, okay? So when the oval window pushes in, the round window, like my cheeks, bulges out. The round window is covered with a membrane, and that membrane is flexible. Right here where my cursor is. It can move in and out. It can bend. So when the oval window pushes in with sound waves, okay, the round window is bulging out. And that allows the fluid motion to occur in the cochlea. If you didn't have that trade-off of information between the oval and round windows, you wouldn't have any activation inside the cochlea. You want the fluids in the cochlea to move. And what allows them to move is the interaction, the oval window pushing in and the round window bulging out. Good. All right, keep her going. So, oval window, round window, promontory, there you have it. Okay? Foot plate of the stapes fits into the oval window. The round window is covered by a tough membrane. The Eustachian tube connects the middle ear to what we call the nasopharynx. In English, nasal is nose, pharynx is throat. So it basically connects your middle ear to the bottom of your nasal cavity and your throat. Basically just connects it to your throat. Okay? And you have tiny cilia, tiny little hairs inside your Eustachian tube. And these tiny little hairs are always pushing down. They're always trying to drain the middle ear space. They're always pushing down. And so they're naturally trying to keep things out of the middle ear. Eustachian tubes. Share screen. So it's the Eustachian tube cilia, little hairs in the mucus lining of the tubes move particles in it down to the throat. The Eustachian tube is closed unless swallowing, yawning, or blowing your nose, as we said. It actually opens about once a minute while you're awake and about once every 5 minutes while you're asleep. And why does it open periodically? To allow new air to come into this middle ear space. For the middle ear to work well, air pressure behind the drum has to be equal to air pressure outside the drum. When the air pressure on both sides of the eardrum is even, Steven, that's when the middle ear works the best. Okay? You want that, so you want new air coming up in here because you want the air to be fresh, new, clean, no caffeine. Okay? You want it nice, and you want it equal with the air pressure outside the eardrum. Infant eustachian tubes are shorter, wider, and more horizontal, just like we said before. Therefore, children are more susceptible to what we call earaches. And look at the word here, conductive hearing loss. Remember what we said in our first Zoom session 2 weeks ago? We said that with problems to the outer ears or problems to the middle ears, you get a conductive hearing loss. Okay, let me explain that very clearly. The word conductive means to travel. A wire conducts electricity. Air conducts sound. Okay, conduction just means the pathway. So you need an outer ear to gather sound and to resonate like a quarter wave resonator. Okay, you need the middle ear to bring the sound waves up to the inner ear. So the outer and middle ears are involved in the conductive mechanism. They carry sounds to where they gotta go. So if you have a problem in the outer ear, like earwax, or a problem in the middle ear called otitis media, that will give you a conductive hearing loss, meaning sound is having trouble getting through the ear. Elderly people don't have a problem with that. Elderly people don't have a conductive hearing loss. Elderly people may not have any earwax, nor do they have ear infections. So their problems are due to hair cell damage in the inner ear. And the hair cells, what do? They change fluid motion in the cochlea. They change that fluid motion into electricity. And electricity travels up the 8th nerves to the brain. And that's how you hear. So if you've got problems to the inner ears, you have what's called a sensory neural hearing loss. Sensory and neural. And you can call that SNHL. And SNHL, or sensory neural hearing loss, is like responsible for 95% of hearing loss in the world. Okay, otitis media, or earwax problems, is only responsible for 5% of hearing loss in the world. And conductive hearing loss can be fixed by medicine. You can remove the wax and you can get rid of the infection with antibiotics or whatever, but you can't fix a sensory neural loss. Always remember, compare it to the eye. The eyeball, the light goes through the pupils, and it goes to the retina, the back of the eyes. And what does the retina do? Changes light into electricity. And electricity is the language the brain understands. So in most people with glasses, like me, we have a conductive vision loss because light isn't properly hitting the retinas of the eyes. So you go to the dollar store, you get glasses to refocus the light properly, and God's in his heaven and all's well with the world. But if I went to your eyes and scratched the back of your eyeballs, okay, now you'd have retinal damage. And now glasses wouldn't be 100% anymore. They might help a bit, but they wouldn't fix it. And that's the thing with hearing loss. Hearing loss involves damage to the retina, in quotes, of the ear. And the retina in quotes, of the ear is the inner ear. Damage to the inner ear is the most common cause of hearing loss. It causes sensory neural loss, and it's what makes hearing aids for the ear vastly different than eyeglasses for the eye. So middle ear pathology causes a conductive hearing loss, which can be cured by medicine, in the most part. Okay, good. Look what it says here. Air pressure must be even on both sides of the eardrum for the middle ear to work optimally. Middle ear mucus lining constantly absorbs oxygen, O2. So the Eustachian tube, what would happen here is you'd constantly get negative air pressure because the mucus lining is constantly absorbing oxygen. So periodic opening of the Eustachian tube allows new air to get in and replenish the supply. Otherwise, you'd have a vacuum in this middle ear space. And if you had a vacuum, you'd have negative air pressure. And if you had negative air pressure, it would not be even with the normal air pressure outside the drum. You see? So you need a functioning Eustachian tube to allow new air to come into the middle ear space on a constant basis. The middle ear ossicles, remember them now, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, and the ligaments. And let's look at the malleus closely here. The malleus, here's the handle. They call that the manubrium of the malleus. And here, this actually is the manubrium of the malleus, the handle. And look, it's attached to the back of the drum. You'd have to tear it off the drum. It's attached, okay? And notice it starts at the top, and it ends at the umbo, the center of the drum. It doesn't go all the way down to the bottom. It ends at the center. And then this is the hammer part. So the manubrium is the handle, and this is the hammer part. This whole bone, the malleus. The incus is the second bone. It has two parts. It has a short process and a long process. Short process, long process. And now look at the stapes. The stapes has a neck, and it has two, what they call crura, and then the bottom is called the foot plate. The neck, the crura, C-R-U-R-A, crura, and foot plate. Those are the pieces and parts of the middle ear bones. And it's written right here, incus, long process, short process. Stapes, the head is attached to the incus. Crura are attached to the foot plate. The foot plate is in the oval window. And ligaments extend from the walls of the middle ear space to hold the ossicles in place. The best way to think of the three ossicles is as an ossicular chain. They are a unit. They're all stuck together. It's not like the hammer hits the eardrum hits the malleus hits the incus hits the stapes. It doesn't work that way. This is all a unit. They are stuck together. They all move as a unit back and forth. And the purpose is to push the oval window or to push the stapes foot plate in and out of the oval window. All right, this is another picture of the ear drum. Malleus, incus, stapes. You can see the ligaments all here, holding the ossicular chain. Oftentimes, the three ossicles is called the ossicular chain. They work as a unit. And here's the tensor tympani muscle. Here's a tendon of the stapedius muscle. And the stapedius muscle is attached to the neck of the stapes. And the tensor tympani muscle is attached to the manubrium of the malleus, the handle of the malleus. There's the schematic again, showing you the malleus, incus. Here's the short process of the incus, the long process of the incus. Here's the hammer portion of the malleus. Here's the manubrium of the malleus. You can see how it ends at the umbo. Here's the neck of the stapes, the crura of the stapes, the footplate of the stapes, and you can see this is the oval window here, and then you have the promontory, and then the round window here, and then Eustachian tube going down to the throat. This is just a schematic of the outer of the ear. I don't know, this is what you call a white slide with nothing on it. I don't know why, but there it is. Here's another picture showing you the middle ear again. Outer ear canal, eardrum, the umbo, the manubrium of the malleus, the hammer portion of the malleus, short process, long process, neck of the stapes, crura of the stapes, footplate of the stapes, round, oval window, round window, and the bone in between, the promontory. Here's the tendon of the tensor tympani muscle. And I don't see the stapedius muscle. Oh yeah, here it is, stapedius muscle, right there. So you can see that the stapedius muscle is the smaller of the two muscles, yet it's the stronger. It's the strongest of the two middle ear muscles. Really, the acoustic reflex is mostly comprised by the action of this tiny little stapedius muscle. You wouldn't think so, but it is. Look at your notes again. We've covered page 1. Top of page 2, middle ear muscles, stapedius muscle. It's only 7 millimeters long. Now let's get our metric straight again. What's a centimeter? Your fingernail. 1/10 of your fingernail is a millimeter. Okay? You have 10 millimeters in a centimeter. You have 100 centimeters in a meter, which is about a yard, 39 inches, not 36. And you have 1,000 meters makes a kilometer, which is a little more than a half a mile. Okay? Good to learn metric because all science uses metric, even in the good old USA. All right? So it's important to get a grip on what a centimeter and what a millimeter is. Stapedius muscle, you can see, is not even a centimeter long. It's not 10 millimeters. That's a centimeter. It's 7. So it's small. Goes from the posterior wall of your middle ear space and ends at the neck of the stapes. It is innervated by the 7th facial nerve, or in other words, the 7th cranial nerve is called the facial nerve. Okay? 7th cranial nerve, and it's called the facial nerve. It's the strongest of the two muscles involved. The tensor tympani muscle is much longer, and it inserts into the manubrium, the handle of the malleus bone. And it's innervated by the weaker cranial nerve, the 5th cranial nerve, or we often call it the trigeminal nerve. Why trigeminal nerve? Because it's got 3 branches. A triangle has 3 corners. The trigeminal nerve has 3 branches. One branch ends at the cheek, another branch ends at the mandible or jaw, and the 3rd branch more by the ear. So trigeminal is the name of the 5th cranial nerve. The facial nerve is how you smile. You move your cheeks. That's the 7th cranial nerve. And it also connects to the stapedius muscle. Okay, it's the strongest of your 2 middle ear muscles. All right. Now we are at the physiology of the middle ear. And we won't go much further than what we have today, okay? I want you to realize, memorize the middle ear muscles, memorize the nerves that innervate them, know that the word innervate means to connect to, know that muscles cannot contract unless a nerve tells them to. And your brain talks to the nerves which carry the messages to your muscles. So basically, nerves end at muscles or glands. They tell muscles to contract, they tell glands to secrete. And always remember, you have 2 kinds of nerves. One sends info to your brain, the other set takes info from your brain. It's not a one-way street, right? What kind of information is carried to your brain? Sensory information, vision, touch, hearing, taste, smell. All of those are called afferent. A-F-F-E-R-E-N-T. Afferent. Those nerves are sensory nerves. Sensory nerves carry info from the body to the brain. Okay? The other type of nerve is called efferent. E-F-F-E-R-E-N-T. The words are almost the same, only one's with an A and the other one's with an E. Okay? Efferent nerves carry info from the brain to the muscles or glands. Okay? Afferent nerve is the 8th cranial nerve because it's a sensory nerve carrying hearing information to your brain. The 5th nerve, okay, the 5th and the 7th have a motor portion. In other words, they have an efferent portion. They carry info from the brain to contract muscles. Okay? I think the 5th cranial nerve has a bit of a sensory, a bit of an afferent portion, and a bit of an efferent portion. The 7th cranial nerve is mostly efferent. It's mostly motor. It's the stronger, and it connects to the stapedius muscle, which is the smallest but the strongest of the 2 muscles of your middle ear. And the contraction of those 2 muscles is called the acoustic reflex. Now, to read further, we will cover, for next week, we will be looking at the physiology of the middle ear. Okay, and I'm going to cover this quickly now so that you'll have heard it once, and then next week we can dive right into it because we want to get down to here for next week. The middle ear, important. Air pressure has to be equal on both sides of the tympanic membrane for the middle ear to optimally do its job. Now, here's a word that's important. Transduce. We use this word all the time in our field. The middle ear transduces or changes sound vibrations into mechanical energy. Transduce means to change energy from one form to another. Okay, so what does the middle ear do? It takes sound waves, those compressions, those rarefactions. It takes those wavelengths, okay, with the period and the speed of sound and all that crap. It changes sound waves in air into mechanical piston-like energy. The footplate of the stapes pushing in and out of the oval window. All right, that's one purpose of the middle ear, to transduce or change sound into mechanical energy. Now, what was I going to say here? This is, oh yeah, transduce. You want another example of a transducer? A microphone. You talk into a mic. You're changing sound waves into electricity. So a microphone is a transducer. And here I'll give you another example of a transducer, a speaker. A speaker changes electricity back into sound. So in a way, a speaker is a backward mic. A mic is a backward speaker. Okay? They're both transducers. And why am I saying this? Because hearing aids have a mic and they have a speaker. They have 2 transducers. Okay? So that word transduce is a big one in our field. Transduce means to change energy from one form to another form. And hearing aids have 2 transducers. A mic changes sound into electricity. The electricity is amplified, and then the amplified electricity is changed back into sound by the speaker. And in a hearing aid, the speaker is called a receiver because it receives the electricity. But anyway, I'm going ahead of myself. Back to your notes here. Middle ear transduces or changes vibration energy of sound into mechanical energy. The stapes is not truly like a piston, but it more or less has a rocking motion, but still mechanical energy. Here's another thing that the middle ear does. What did we have in 110 this morning? We had that word impedance. What did we say in 110 this morning in acoustics? If I move my hand through the air, no problem. If I hit my head, I've just ran into some impedance. If I do a belly flop, it hurts because I went through the air and I hit the water. I ran into the impedance of the water. Your inner ear is filled with fluid. Airborne sound is going to bounce right off the fluid of the middle of the inner ear. It's not going to be able to activate. You think about it, if you have your head under a swimming pool, and I'm talking to you from the outside of the pool and you're swimming under the water, you're not going to hear a word I'm saying because all my airborne sound waves are going to bounce off of the water. Okay? Something has to help airborne sound activate a fluid-filled cochlea. And that something is called the middle ear. The middle ear helps to overcome what we call the impedance mismatch as sound goes from air to the fluid of the cochlea. Think of someone at the edge of a swimming pool talking to you while your head is underwater. You won't hear that person at all. Airborne sound has to activate a fluid-filled cochlea. Otherwise, you'd lose 99.9% of the sound. Everything is for a reason. The middle ear is what gives mammals like us exceptionally sensitive hearing. Much better than the hearing sensitivity that is in reptiles and birds. Who knows? Maybe this is what helped the little rodent-like mammals escape the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs couldn't hear. Reptiles don't have a middle ear. Okay? They may have pieces of a cochlea, but they don't have a middle ear. So airborne sound has to be a lot louder to activate the inner ear of birds and reptiles. Not in mammals. Dogs and cats and cows and horses and humans, we have a middle ear. And the middle ear helps airborne sound overcome the impedance mismatch between air and fluid. And when you go down here, you will see in this section that we will look at in detail next week, the 3 ways in which the middle ear overcomes impedance mismatch. We are going to be describing that. For now, I will just have you do this little exercise with me. Okay, look at the big eardrum. Look at the little footplate of the stapes. Now, take your hand, push it against your cheek. And now what I'm going to ask you to push, on the count of 3, push really hard. 1, 2, 3. Stop. Now put your finger against your cheek. At the count of 3, push really hard. 1, 2, 3. Hurts, didn't it? This didn't hurt. This did. That's why you have a middle ear. The middle ear takes sound. It hits the big eardrum, and the force over that big area, like your hand, is converged onto a little area, like your finger. And in that way, you've increased the sound pressure. And in that way, you've overcome the impedance mismatch between air and fluid. You have helped airborne sound activate a fluid-filled cochlea, because sound hit a big area of your eardrum and that force got squeezed onto a point. Think of if you pretend you're laying on your back and I'm your roommate and you're watching TV. You're just laying here watching TV and you're propped up on a pillow, and I walk up to you and I put a cinder block on your tummy. What are you going to say? You're going to say, "Ugh, get that off of me." But what if I had a nail on that cinder block? Well, now it's going to kill you. You're going to take a dirt nap. Okay? Pressure is force over an area. Thin bike tires have more air pressure than wide car tires. Okay? Just think about it like that. So sound hitting a big eardrum, all that force gets converged onto the point of the footplate of your stapes, and thereby you've increased the pressure of sound. I can give you another example. How does a knife cut bread? Okay, think of a knife cutting bread. The force of your arm is converged onto the thin razor edge of the knife. And that's how the knife can cut through meat and through bread. Same principle. Pressure is force over an area. So force over a big area, not much pressure. Force over a tiny area, buku pressure. Okay? And that is the main purpose of your middle ear, is to overcome the impedance mismatch. In other words, air doesn't have much impedance, but water sure does. A belly flop hurts. Okay? So you've got to overcome that impedance of the water so that sound can activate that fluid-filled cochlea. So you have everything for a reason. You think of the outer ear and its shape because it resonates like a wine glass with high treble sounds, which helps you hear soft consonants of speech like F, S, TH, SH, CH. All right, you have the middle ear to overcome the impedance mismatch, and it also transduces airborne sound into mechanical piston-like energy. Very important. The more we cover today, the less I have to do tomorrow or next week. Here, look at the Rene tuning fork test. Now, I'm not sure if I've got tuning forks on me here or not, okay? But I'm just going to tell you something here. In case I don't, I'm just looking in my little drawer here to see if I got them or not. But I don't, so no matter. Pretend. Here we go. Here's the Rene tuning fork test. And I think I'm going to bring my tuning forks in next week on the Zoom session so you can get this really an idea. But for now, I'll just tell you, okay? Say I took a tuning fork and went, dong, and you know what a tuning fork is. I'll draw you. You know, it kind of, it's, okay? Looks like a big Y. Here's the stem, and there's the tines of the tuning fork. So say I took the tuning fork and went, dong, and I put the stem. Now put your hand behind your ear. Feel that bone. You feel that round bone? That's your mastoid bone. Okay, that's a porous portion of your mastoid bone, and it encircles your whole outer ear canal and part of your middle ear. Anyway, if I took the tuning fork and went dong, and I put the stem on the mastoid bone, you'd hear it. Well, yeah, you'd hear something. But what if I took it off and I held the tines, the two ends right by your ear? Whoa, it's going to be louder. So you're going to hear it through the bone, but when I hold it by your ear, whoa, much louder. You're going to hear it louder by air conduction than you will by bone conduction. How come? Because this isn't involving your middle ear. I'm sending sound straight to your cochlea this way through the bone. When I hold the tines by your outer ear, you're involving not only your outer ear, but also that increase of pressure offered by your middle ear, because sound is hitting the big drum and that force is being converged onto a little area. So when I hold it this way, whoa, I've got the middle ear involved, way louder. And that's called the Rene tuning fork test, R-I-N-N-E, named after a doctor called Rene. And it is an eloquent demonstration of what the middle ear adds to sound. It compares a client's own hearing by air conduction and bone conduction. Ask a client which sounds loudest, when the fork is next to your outer ear or when the fork is held against your mastoid bone. The normal situation is you should hear the tone louder when it's held by your outer ear, by air conduction. This is because the middle ear amplifies sound. Bone conduction alone through the mastoid does not involve the middle ear. This is a test that's routinely done in clinics by ear, nose, and throat doctors to check your hearing. If they want to find out if a kid has otitis media, otoear-itis inflammation, middle ear infection, kid has an earache, they'll often, and they'll hold the tuning fork here and then hold it here, and they'll say to the child, which was louder? And the child says, none. Oh, your middle ear must be infected, because it should be louder when it's held here. If it's not, you got a middle ear infection. See? And that's how people diagnose hearing loss. You can have hearing loss due to the outer or middle ears, conductive hearing loss. You can have hearing loss due to damage to the inner ear. If your hearing loss is damage to the inner ear, if I go thong and hold it to the bone, yeah, the person still might hear it, but if I hold it here, yep, still going to be louder. How come? Because the middle ear is not infected. The middle ear still works. So Mrs. Jones, who's 75 years old, who has hearing loss due to the inner ear, that Rene tuning fork is going to have a normal result, just like it will to you and me who has normal hearing. Why? Because she has no problem with her middle ear. As long as there's no problem with your middle ear, bone-conducted sound will be softer than air-conducted sound. That's the Rene tuning fork test. It should be louder by air conduction for normal hearing, and also louder by air conduction for people who have nothing wrong with the middle ear, but they have hearing loss due to the inner ear. They too will have a normal finding on the Rene test. The only one who won't is the person with a middle ear infection who has a conductive hearing loss. All right, I'm done like dinner. It's good. Hey, guess what I have to do this afternoon? I got to go to a dentist appointment. Yuck!
Yeah.
Gross. It sucks to be me. All right. We'll see you next week, okay? Thanks for showing up, Anna Woods. You're the one who's consistently showed up here. You get the prize. Anyway, if you're missing any of this because you've had to go off to do something, remember this is always recorded, so you can always listen again, and that's always the good thing about a recorded Zoom session. You can always come back to them. You can stop it. You can write down notes. You can go back in and chat and get the part that you missed, whatever. Anyway, I'm going to shut my face now. I be done. Cheers. See you later.